There are moments in life when people simply want to enjoy the fruits of their hard work. For one man, that dream was simple: to turn his backyard into a quiet oasis where he could escape from the noise of the world. After years of saving, budgeting, and carefully planning, he finally decided to install a small pool in his backyard. It wasn't extravagant. It wasn't some Olympic-sized monstrosity. It was a modest pool, neatly tucked against the fence, surrounded by clean stone tiles and a couple of lounge chairs. For him, it was more than just a pool. It was peace. It was late-night swims after long workdays. It was family barbecues, splashing around with his kids, and quiet afternoons with his wife, floating under the sun. It was the slice of happiness he had always imagined for his family, and when the contractors completed the job, he felt proud of what he had built. But in communities governed by homeowners associations, dreams often collide with rules, power struggles, and the whims of people who think they know better. The HOA in this neighborhood was infamous. Residents whispered about how the board nitpicked everything from mailbox paint colors to the height of holiday decorations, and at the head of it all was the president, a woman whose neighbors quietly referred to as the warden. She thrived on control, the kind of person who saw any change to the neighborhood not as improvement, but as a personal attack on her authority. So when she caught sight of the freshly installed pool one morning, her face hardened. She saw it not as a family's retreat, but as a violation. In her eyes, it was an unapproved structure, grounds for fines, legal notices, and if she pushed hard enough, even eviction. The first letter arrived less than a week after the pool was finished. Neatly folded into an HOA envelope, stamped with the association's official seal, it demanded the immediate removal of the unauthorized pool and threatened fines of $500 per day until the violation was corrected. At first, he thought it was a mistake. Surely this was a misunderstanding. He checked the HOA handbook and flipped through the regulations. The rules mentioned above-ground pools were restricted, but his wasn't above ground. The handbook also mentioned structures needing prior approval, but his pool was categorized as a water feature under city zoning laws. He was on solid ground. He knew it, but that didn't stop the HOA. The second notice arrived within days, this one more aggressive, claiming that the integrity of the community's visual standards was at risk. By the third letter, the threats escalated. The board declared that continued defiance could result in property liens or even eviction from the neighborhood. That word, eviction, hit hard. How could they threaten to take away his home over a pool that wasn't even violating their rules? It became clear that this wasn't about rules at all. It was about power. The HOA president saw the pool as a challenge to her control, and she was determined to crush it. Still, he refused to back down. Every notice they sent, he documented. Every phone call, he recorded. Every letter he received, he filed neatly into a growing binder he called the War Book. He wasn't going to be bullied into tearing down something that was rightfully his. But standing up to an HOA isn't easy. They thrive on intimidation, on scaring homeowners into submission with threats of financial ruin. And as the fines piled higher on paper, the stress in his household grew. His wife worried about what might happen if the fight dragged into court. His children overheard the conversations and asked if they would lose their home. The pool that was meant to bring peace was now the center of constant anxiety. Yet, something in him refused to give in. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe it was principle, or maybe it was simply the fact that he had worked too hard to let someone else strip away his happiness. He didn't just want to win this fight, he needed to win it. That determination gave him an idea. If the HOA wanted to make his pool into a battlefield, then he would turn it into a stage. Instead of hiding away, he would make the pool a centerpiece, something the whole neighborhood couldn't ignore. Something that would expose just how ridiculous the HOA's war really was. So he planned a gathering. Nothing over the top, just a backyard pool party for friends, neighbors, and family. Music, barbecue, laughter, the sound of children splashing. a celebration of the very thing the HOA wanted to destroy. But fate had a way of turning ordinary events into extraordinary ones. Because at that pool party, an unexpected guest would arrive, someone who held more power in the community than the HOA president ever dreamed of, and their presence would flip the entire battle upside down. As he sent out the invitations and set up the backyard, he had no idea that this party would become the turning point. And when the first cars began pulling up to his driveway, the stage was set for a clash that would leave the entire neighborhood buzzing. The pool wasn't just water and stone anymore. It was about to become the most powerful symbol in the fight against HOA overreach. The invitations went out quietly, handwritten and slipped into mailboxes, text messages sent to close friends and neighbors who understood the struggle. It wasn't about throwing a grand spectacle. It was about gathering people together to enjoy something simple, something human, community, laughter, relaxation. The very things the HOA was supposed to protect, but instead sought to control. In the days leading up to the event, the homeowner transformed his backyard into a welcoming space. He strung up soft lights along the fence, set out chairs and tables, and stocked coolers with drinks. The grill was cleaned and ready, the pool water gleamed crystal blue, and a sense of anticipation hung in the air. It wasn't just another Saturday barbecue. This was a stand, a subtle act of defiance against the people who thought they could dictate every detail of his life. But defiance never goes unnoticed in an HOA-run neighborhood. The president, the warden, as people called her, caught wind of the preparations almost immediately. From her kitchen window, she could see the lights being strung. She noted the delivery truck dropping off extra supplies. She spotted the chairs lined neatly along the backyard. To her, it looked like a challenge, a personal insult, a direct act of rebellion against her authority. She wasn't about to let it go unpunished. The first tactic was intimidation. A letter appeared on his doorstep 2 days before the party, warning him that unauthorized gatherings of more than 10 people violated HOA policy. The notice claimed that noise complaints and parking congestion would not be tolerated. The letter ended with a veiled threat. Any violations will result in immediate action by the board. He read the letter carefully, slipped it into his war book, and smiled. The HOA handbook made no such rule about gatherings. It was a bluff, and he knew it. The second tactic was surveillance. The morning of the party, the president and 2 board members walked slowly along the street, clipboards in hand, peering over fences and jotting down notes. They made no attempt to hide their presence. Their message was clear. "We're watching you." But even that couldn't dull the excitement of the day. By noon, cars began pulling up. Friends, family, and neighbors filed in, carrying food, snacks, and folding chairs. Music drifted into the air, children's laughter filled the yard, and the pool sparkled as the first splashes broke its calm surface. For the first time in weeks, the homeowner felt his shoulders relax. For the first time, the pool felt like joy again. Yet, even as the party came alive, the HOA's eyes were fixed on him. From across the street, the president stood with arms folded, phone in hand, snapping photos and muttering to herself. Every parked car, every laugh that carried across the fence, every splash from the pool was, in her mind, another strike against him. She sent messages to other board members, urging them to prepare emergency measures, but there was something she didn't anticipate. This party wasn't just drawing in friends and neighbors. Word of the HOA's bullying had spread further than she realized. Some guests had invited their own acquaintances, curious to see the infamous pool that had sparked a neighborhood war. The backyard was buzzing not just with laughter, but with whispers of defiance. People compared their own stories, the fines for flower pots that didn't match, the threats over holiday lights, the endless nitpicking that had drained joy from their lives. The party became more than a gathering. It became a rally. And then, just as the afternoon sun reached its peak, a sleek black car pulled into the driveway. Heads turned, conversations hushed, and from the back seat stepped a figure that none of them expected. It was the mayor. The homeowner's cousin, it turned out, worked closely with city officials and had extended a casual invitation, half expecting it to be declined. But the mayor, intrigued by the story of the HOA's overreach, had accepted. The mayor wasn't there in any official capacity. They arrived simply as a guest, dressed casually, smiling warmly as they shook hands and thanked the homeowner for the invitation. But their presence carried weight. The moment the HOA president spotted them, her confident scowl faltered. The sight of the city's highest official sitting poolside, sipping a drink, and laughing with neighbors shifted the atmosphere completely. What had started as an ordinary backyard party had transformed into something much larger. A quiet rebellion, with the mayor as a witness. And the homeowner knew in that moment that the HOA's grip on him was slipping. But the president wasn't done yet. If anything, the sight of the mayor in attendance only fueled her anger. She vanished into her house, phone pressed to her ear, rallying board members and threatening to call the police to shut down the gathering. The homeowner didn't know it yet, but the HOA was about to launch their most aggressive attack yet, one that would either end the party in chaos or backfire in spectacular fashion. And as the sun began to dip low in the sky, the battle lines were being drawn for the next confrontation. The pool, once again, was no longer just water and stone. It was now a stage where power, pride, and authority were about to collide. Aunt of the day. As the afternoon slipped into evening, the party swelled with life. The smell of barbecue drifted through the air, children's laughter rang out in waves, and the cool blue water of the pool shimmered under string lights. For a moment, the homeowner allowed himself to believe the storm had passed. He watched his neighbors smile, his children splash freely, and even the mayor lean back in a chair, enjoying the rare chance to blend into ordinary life. But peace is never long-lived when an HOA president feels her power slipping. Inside her home, the president paced furiously, clutching her phone. She couldn't stand the sight across the street. A pool, lights, music, laughter, and now the mayor. It was a humiliation she couldn't stomach. The party wasn't just an event. To her, it was open rebellion, a declaration that her authority meant nothing. And for someone like her, that was intolerable. She dialed number after number, summoning her board members to action. When her threats didn't ignite the immediate response she wanted, she raised the stakes. She called the police. Her voice shook with outrage as she described a disruptive, unauthorized gathering taking place in the neighborhood. She painted a picture of cars blocking streets, noise disturbing residents, and violations stacking high. She spoke as if the pool party was chaos incarnate, a dangerous event spiraling out of control. It was the ultimate weapon of the HOA, escalating petty disputes into official matters, hoping that fear of authority would break resistance. Back at the party, the homeowner noticed the president glaring from her window. He knew she wasn't done. He could feel it, the tightening knot of trouble brewing. Still, he chose calm over confrontation. He greeted his guests, offered drinks, and laughed when the mayor complimented the backyard setup. If the HOA president wanted to ruin his evening, he wouldn't give her the satisfaction. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, flashing red and blue lights appeared at the end of the street. The distant wail of sirens cut through the music, and suddenly, the laughter around the pool fell into uneasy silence. The president's trap had been sprung. Neighbors shifted nervously, whispering to one another. Children climbed out of the pool, dripping wet and wide-eyed. The music faded as someone turned down the speaker, and the homeowner felt his chest tighten. He had known the HOA would try something, but calling the police? It was a bold move, one that could make or break everything. 2 patrol cars rolled to a stop in front of the house. Officers stepped out, their faces neutral, scanning the scene. What they found wasn't chaos. It wasn't disorder. It wasn't anything like the report they'd received. What they saw was a family-friendly gathering. Kids with floaties, parents chatting over grilled food, neighbors sitting comfortably in lawn chairs. And then they saw the mayor. The officers exchanged quick glances, their posture shifting immediately. They walked calmly toward the homeowner, not with aggression, but with measured professionalism. They asked a few questions, about noise, about parking, about permits. The homeowner answered politely, pointing out that cars were parked legally and that noise was well within city ordinances. It didn't take long for the officers to realize what was happening. This wasn't a public safety issue. This was an HOA president's vendetta. Across the street, the president stormed out of her house, waving her hands and shouting. She insisted the gathering was illegal. She claimed the pool was a violation, the party a nuisance, and the homeowner a defiant troublemaker. She demanded the police shut everything down. But her words carried little weight now. One officer calmly asked her for documentation of the supposed violations. She produced nothing concrete. She waved her arms, insisting on the HOA's authority, but the officers only nodded politely before reminding her that HOA rules were not city law. Noise ordinances were not violated, parking laws were not broken, and the mayor's very presence at the gathering made it abundantly clear this was no reckless disturbance. The president's face turned red with rage. Her plan had failed. Instead of witnessing the police dismantle the party, the neighborhood was now watching the officers walk away, leaving the celebration intact. The mayor leaned forward in their chair, smirking slightly at the spectacle. They didn't have to say a word. Their presence was enough to silence the board's intimidation. The party resumed with renewed energy, laughter rising louder than before, as though the neighborhood itself wanted to defy the president's tantrum. The pool shimmered under the night sky, and the music once again filled the air. But the homeowner knew this wasn't the end. The president wouldn't back down after a single failed attempt. If anything, her pride was wounded, and wounded pride often strikes harder. As he watched the children dive back into the water and the mayor chatting easily with neighbors, he realized the battle was shifting. The HOA had tried to bring authority into the fight, and it had backfired. Now their only option would be to escalate further. And escalate they would. The president had lost face, but she hadn't lost her obsession. In her mind, the pool still represented rebellion. And if the police wouldn't help her, she would find another way to tear it down. The homeowner had won the night, but the war was far from over. The morning after the pool party, the neighborhood buzzed with whispers. People who had attended retold the story in hushed excitement. The police showing up, the mayor sitting poolside, and the HOA president's red-faced tantrum as her plan crumbled. Some laughed, others shook their heads, but all agreed on one thing. The balance of power had shifted. But power-hungry people rarely admit defeat. The HOA president was humiliated, but humiliation only sharpened her resolve. If she couldn't shut down the pool with intimidation or police, she would try something far more dangerous. She would bury the homeowner in paper, rules, fines, and legal threats until his will cracked under the weight of bureaucracy. The first envelope arrived 3 days later, a formal violation notice stamped with the HOA's letterhead claiming structural non-compliance. It demanded removal of the pool within 10 days, along with a fine of $5,000 for failure to submit prior approval. The homeowner added it to his war book. The second envelope came the next morning, a threat of lien. The board declared that unpaid fines would result in a lien placed on his home, preventing him from selling or refinancing. Into the war book it went. By the end of the week, the mailbox overflowed with letters. Some were stamped urgent, others filled with bold red warnings. Each carried new fines, escalating penalties, and threats of legal action. It was clear the HOA president wasn't fighting for the community. She was fighting for her pride, and she would use every ounce of authority the board could muster. The homeowner's family felt the pressure. His wife worried about their finances, calculating the impact of liens and potential court costs. His children overheard arguments and asked questions no child should ask. Are we going to lose our home? The pool, once their sanctuary, became a symbol of looming conflict. Every splash of water seemed to echo the ticking clock of the HOA's threats. But the homeowner refused to fold. He spent late nights researching city codes, state property laws, and legal precedents. He discovered that while the HOA had power, their power was not absolute. They could enforce community guidelines, yes, but they could not invent rules out of thin air. And their threats of eviction? Empty. The HOA had no such authority without going through the courts, and the courts had far stricter standards than the president's personal vendettas. Armed with knowledge, he prepared his counterattack. He hired a property attorney, sliding a thick binder, his war book, across the lawyer's desk. Inside were months of letters, threats, and contradictions. The lawyer flipped through page after page, eyebrows rising higher with each document. By the end, the attorney leaned back in his chair, confident. The HOA, he explained, had overstepped. Many of their claims were legally baseless. Their threats of eviction were hollow. Their fines exceeded what the bylaws permitted. The homeowner had been pushed into a corner, but ironically, it was the HOA president who had left herself exposed. Word of the lawyer's involvement spread quickly through the neighborhood. Neighbors whispered that the homeowner was fighting back, not just with defiance, but with law on his side. For the first time, residents felt a spark of hope. They, too, had suffered under the board's heavy hand, the nitpicking, the endless fines, the fear of retaliation. And now, someone was standing up. The president, sensing her grip slipping, escalated further. She ordered a special board meeting, filling the room with supporters she had handpicked. They drafted resolutions, voted on retroactive policies, and claimed the authority to levy massive fines. But their desperation was obvious. Each new measure contradicted their own bylaws, exposing the cracks in their foundation. The homeowner attended the meeting, silent but watchful. He didn't need to argue, he only needed to observe. Every misstep, every overreach was another weapon for his war book. As the weeks rolled on, the HOA's paper war intensified, but so did his resolve. His attorney prepared filings, letters, and formal responses. Each time the HOA tried to press harder, they found themselves tangled deeper in their own contradictions. The battle was no longer one man against an association. It was principle against abuse of power. And then, a letter arrived that changed everything. It wasn't from the HOA. It wasn't from their lawyers. It was from the city. The mayor, the very guest who had sat poolside weeks earlier, had apparently taken notice of the ongoing conflict. The letter announced a formal review of the HOA's practices, citing multiple complaints from residents about excessive fines, intimidation, and misuse of authority. A city oversight committee would be investigating the association's conduct. The president had fired her shots, but the homeowner had allies she never expected. For the first time, the HOA board wasn't in control of the narrative. The eyes of the city were on them. Their authority, their practices, their very legitimacy was under scrutiny. And in the quiet of his home, the homeowner finally allowed himself a rare smile. The pool wasn't just standing, it was stronger than ever. But the fight wasn't over. The HOA had been cornered, and cornered power doesn't surrender easily. The president still had one card left to play, and she was willing to risk everything on it. Word of the lawyer's involvement spread quickly through the neighborhood. Neighbors whispered that the homeowner was fighting back, not just with defiance, but with law on his side. For the first time, residents felt a spark of hope. They, too, had suffered under the board's heavy hand, the nitpicking, the endless fines, the fear of retaliation. And now, someone was standing up. The president, sensing her grip slipping, escalated further. She ordered a special board meeting, filling the room with supporters she had handpicked. They drafted resolutions, voted on retroactive policies, and claimed the authority to levy massive fines. But their desperation was obvious. Each new measure contradicted their own bylaws, exposing the cracks in their foundation. The homeowner attended the meeting, silent but watchful. He didn't need to argue, he only needed to observe. Every misstep, every overreach was another weapon for his war book. As the weeks rolled on, the HOA's paper war intensified, but so did his resolve. His attorney prepared filings, letters, and formal responses. Each time the HOA tried to press harder, they found themselves tangled deeper in their own contradictions. The battle was no longer one man against an association. It was principle against abuse of power. And then, a letter arrived that changed everything. It wasn't from the HOA. It wasn't from their lawyers. It was from the city. The mayor, the very guest who had sat poolside weeks earlier, had apparently taken notice of the ongoing conflict. The letter announced a formal review of the HOA's practices, citing multiple complaints from residents about excessive fines, intimidation, and misuse of authority. A city oversight committee would be investigating the association's conduct. The president had fired her shots, but the homeowner had allies she never expected. For the first time, the HOA board wasn't in control of the narrative. The eyes of the city were on them. Their authority, their practices, their very legitimacy was under scrutiny. And in the quiet of his home, the homeowner finally allowed himself a rare smile. The pool wasn't just standing, it was stronger than ever. But the fight wasn't over. The HOA had been cornered, and cornered power doesn't surrender easily. The president still had one card left to play, and she was willing to risk everything on it. The homeowner sat calmly beside his attorney, binder resting on the table like a silent ally. He wasn't just a homeowner anymore. He was a man who had refused to bend, even when threatened with financial ruin and eviction. The proceedings began. The HOA's lawyer launched into a storm of accusations, painting the pool as a reckless, unauthorized structure that undermined the entire community. He spoke of bylaws, safety hazards, and supposed complaints from neighbors. The president nodded along, her lips curled in satisfaction as if victory were already assured. But when the homeowner's attorney rose to respond, the tide shifted. Page by page, he dismantled their claims. He showed how the pool complied with city zoning. He presented the bylaws, highlighting contradictions in the HOA's own language. He revealed letters filled with baseless threats of eviction, even though the HOA had no such legal authority. Then came the testimonies. Neighbors stood and spoke of harassment over flower pots, Christmas lights, and mailbox paint. They described the fear of retaliation, the endless fines, the feeling of being prisoners in their own homes. Each story chipped away at the president's image of authority, exposing her not as a protector of community standards, but as a tyrant cloaked in rules. And then came the moment that sealed everything. The mayor walked into the courtroom. They weren't there as a guest at a pool party this time. They were there as an official witness. They testified not about politics, but about what they personally saw that night: a peaceful gathering, a safe and lawful pool, and an HOA president attempting to misuse law enforcement for personal vendetta. Their words carried weight. Their words carried authority the president could never match. The courtroom shifted. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the HOA's lawyer. The president's confidence faltered, her armor cracked. By the end of the trial, the ruling was clear. The HOA had overreached. The pool was lawful. The fines were baseless, and the threats of eviction were deemed harassment. The case was dismissed, and the HOA was ordered to pay the homeowner's legal fees. The president sat frozen, her power slipping through her fingers. For years she had ruled with intimidation, but now her authority had been exposed under the unforgiving light of truth. The homeowner walked out of the courthouse not just victorious, but vindicated. The fight was never just about a pool. It was about principle, about standing up when others bowed, about refusing to be bullied by those who thrived on fear. Yet, even as he stepped into the sunlight, he knew the war wasn't fully over. The courtroom had settled the legal battle, but the HOA still remained. The president still held her seat, even if her crown was cracked. But a storm was coming. One final reckoning that would decide not just his future, but the future of the entire neighborhood. The courtroom victory sent ripples through the neighborhood. Word spread fast, faster than any rumor the HOA president had ever planted. Neighbors who once lived in silence, too afraid to challenge her authority, now walked with newfound confidence. They spoke openly about their frustrations, about the years of intimidation, about the endless stream of fines that had drained not just their wallets, but their joy. The homeowner's triumph wasn't just his own. It became the spark that lit a fire in the community. The pool, once branded a violation, was now a symbol, a shimmering, defiant reminder that the board's grip on the neighborhood was not unbreakable. Every time neighbors passed his house, they glanced at the backyard with a mix of admiration and gratitude. That pool wasn't just water. It was proof that the HOA could be beaten. But for the president, the loss was unbearable. Her authority had been publicly shattered in court. The mayor's testimony had stripped away her credibility. The board's threats had been dismissed as harassment. And now, whispers of rebellion spread through the very community she had once controlled with an iron fist. At first, she tried to tighten her grip. She sent more letters, demanding compliance with trivial infractions. She patrolled the streets with her clipboard, desperate to project power, but each attempt only deepened the resentment. The neighbors no longer trembled. They rolled their eyes. Some ignored her entirely. Others openly mocked her efforts. Then came the petitions. One neighbor, emboldened by the homeowner's victory, drafted a motion to remove the president from her position. Signatures poured in. Families who had once remained silent added their names without hesitation. Within weeks, the petition had enough support to force a special election. The boardroom that had once been her stage of authority became the site of her downfall. Residents packed the room, voices raised, demanding change. One by one, they recounted stories of unfair fines, of petty harassment, of years spent living under the shadow of her rule. And then the votes were cast. The president was removed. She left the room red-faced, muttering under her breath, clutching her clipboard as if it were the last fragment of power she had left. But in that moment, the neighborhood felt lighter. A weight had been lifted. In her place, new leadership stepped in. Neighbors who valued community over control, who saw homes as sanctuaries rather than battlefields. The bylaws were reviewed, the abusive fines repealed, and the endless nitpicking finally eased. The homeowner watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction. He hadn't set out to lead a revolution. He only wanted peace, a small pool in his backyard, and the freedom to enjoy his home without harassment. But in standing his ground, he had done more than protect his family. He had given his neighborhood back its voice. The pool became a gathering place, not just for his family, but for friends, neighbors, and children, who splashed freely without fear of clipboard-wielding patrols. Barbecues filled the air with laughter instead of whispers. Holidays returned with decorations unhindered by threats of fines. The neighborhood was alive again. And as he sat one evening by the water, watching the lights dance across the pool's surface, he thought about everything it had taken to get here. The letters, the fines, the police, the courtroom, the endless stress that had threatened to crush him. But in the end, the pool still stood, and so did he. The fight had been long, bitter, and exhausting, but it proved a truth that every neighbor now carried with them. HOA power isn't absolute. Control can be challenged. And sometimes, all it takes is one act of defiance, one refusal to bow, to unravel an entire empire built on fear. The HOA had tried to evict him for building a pool, but the pool had outlasted them. It had become not just water and stone, but a monument to resistance, to freedom, and to the quiet strength of ordinary people who refused to be pushed down. And in that quiet backyard, surrounded by laughter and peace, the war was finally over. End of Chapter 6.